At a corporate gathering, Laura exposes Harold Smith, shattering his perfect world. The daughter of a poor waitress he turned away 20 years ago, she reveals the truth about his past in front of his family and business partners. Racism, social inequality, and hidden secrets come to light, forever changing his life. The events that follow will shock even the most experienced. But let's start from the beginning. Millionaire Harold Smith was a man admired by many. As the owner of a successful chain of luxury hotels, he built his business from the ground up and reached the pinnacle of success. In his circles, Harold was known as a cold, calculating individual who never showed weakness and kept others at arm's length. His toughness, honed by years of struggle, helped him keep both his business and personal life under strict control. But behind this facade lay a secret that had been gnawing at him for the past 20 years. In his youth, Harold was a different person. Born and raised in a poor neighborhood where survival was a daily battle, he knew the value of every penny. As a teenager, he started working odd jobs to help his family, and that's when he met his first love, Anna, a waitress at a small corner diner. Every shift, Harold would stop by just to see her. Anna was his opposite, cheerful, kind, always smiling despite the hardships. They quickly grew close, and a romance blossomed between them. But as Harold grew older, his ambitions grew stronger. He didn't want to live in poverty like his parents. He dreamed of wealth, luxury, and power. When the opportunity arose to go into business, a business that could make him rich, he made a choice. He left Anna and his youthful love behind, deciding that poverty and love were incompatible with his dreams of fame and success. He moved to another city, starting with small deals, but gradually rising to the top. Anna remained in the past, in that poor neighborhood he was so desperate to forget. Years passed, and although Harold's life was filled with success, Anna remained the one person who could have given him true happiness. Yet he never went back to her, choosing to stay in his world of luxury and cold calculation. He vowed that he would never tell anyone about that part of his life. It was his personal secret, carefully hidden, and no one, not even those closest to him, knew about it. One day, Harold threw an extravagant party to celebrate his company's anniversary. The guest list was long: celebrities, business partners, wealthy clients. The evening was meant to be perfect. However, one of the waitresses caught Harold's eye. Her name was Laura. She moved through the room with a tray, unnoticed by most guests. But something about her appearance, her mannerisms, made Harold tense up. It was a strange sense of déjà vu, as if he had seen her before but couldn't place where. Her face, her eyes, it all seemed to bring back distant, forgotten memories. Harold couldn't take his eyes off Laura. He went to the bar, ordered a drink, and when Laura came to bring it, their eyes met. In that moment, his mind gave him the answer. This girl was the spitting image of Anna. They were like two peas in a pod. Time seemed to stop for a moment. The resemblance was so striking that Harold felt a chill run down his spine. He wanted to ask her where she was from, who her parents were, but that would have been too odd and inappropriate at such a high-profile event. He quickly dismissed these thoughts, convincing himself it was just his imagination. After all, so many years had passed, but memories from the past started to resurface, and they began to trouble him more and more. However, Harold couldn't ignore this strange connection any longer. Despite his efforts to convince himself it was all in his head, he realized that the past he had worked so hard to bury was suddenly knocking on his door. Months passed since that party, when Laura first caught Harold's attention with her uncanny resemblance to Anna. At first, he tried to avoid her, using his busy schedule as an excuse, but Laura seemed to appear everywhere he went. She was present at every event he attended at his hotels. Her work was flawless, her demeanor calm and composed, but in every movement, every word, Harold sensed something deeper, something that made him inwardly tremble. Laura didn't just resemble Anna physically. Every time Harold saw her, he felt as if she knew more than she let on. She wasn't pushy or intrusive, but her glances and short remarks always carried a subtle undertone that unsettled Harold. Her presence was like a constant reminder of the past he so desperately wanted to forget. One time, as they accidentally bumped into each other in a hotel hallway, Harold awkwardly brushed against her tray, and Laura skillfully caught it, saying, "You know, my mother always said that fate loves to play with those who think they can outsmart it." Harold felt something stir inside him. It was said with an innocent smile, but the meaning of those words struck him deeply. Who was her mother? Why did this phrase painfully remind him of something Anna used to say? Suddenly, he felt a wave of anxiety and hurried away without a word. As days passed, Harold thought more and more about Laura. He began watching her closely, trying to find an explanation for the strange feelings she evoked in him. Sometimes it seemed as though she looked at him with a hidden smirk, as if knowing something the rest of the world didn't, but which was clear to her. She didn't say anything overt, but Harold sensed her subtle hints. One evening, during a business dinner, Laura again drew Harold's attention. As she handed him a glass of champagne, she quietly said, "My mother often told me that love between a poor girl and a millionaire couldn't exist. But you know, I think she was wrong." Those words pierced Harold's mind like a knife. He froze for a moment, barely holding the glass. Who was her mother? Could it be Anna? He had never told anyone about his relationship with Anna, let alone how much she believed in their love, even when he chose wealth. He tried to shake off these thoughts, convincing himself that Laura was just toying with him, but the unease grew with every hint she dropped. Snatches of memories resurfaced. His conversations with Anna, her dreams of their future, her belief in their happiness. Harold tried to justify his choices. After all, he had done everything to escape poverty and achieve success. But why was this waitress now bringing him back to things he didn't want to remember? The anxiety didn't leave him for a moment. And a few days later, something happened that completely threw him off balance. One evening, upon returning to his office, Harold found a letter on his desk. It had been placed there despite no one being allowed in. The letter was short, containing only 2 words. "I know." These words made his heart stop. Someone knew his secret. But how? Harold felt a cold shiver down his spine. Laura seemed to know more than any ordinary waitress could. He recalled all their brief conversations, her cryptic phrases, her demeanor. She was clearly playing with him, but her true intentions remained unclear. Was this all just coincidence, or did she really know something? Then a thought crossed his mind, one that made him tremble. Laura might be his daughter. Anna could have had a child after their breakup, and that would explain everything. Laura's words, her behavior, all pointed to this terrible truth. It had been several weeks since Harold found the strange letter on his desk. Every day spent in Laura's company frayed his nerves even more. Her presence, her glances, and her cryptic words haunted him. Harold was a man used to controlling every detail of his life, but now that control was slipping away. The tension inside him kept building, and he realized that just watching Laura wasn't enough. He needed answers. One night, unable to bear the agonizing uncertainty any longer, Harold decided to act. He called an old friend of his, Jack, a private investigator who had helped him with delicate matters in the past. Jack was a true professional, and Harold knew he could trust him with this task. They met at an upscale restaurant in the city, and Harold quickly laid out the problem. "I need you to find out everything about Laura," Harold said, leaning forward and lowering his voice. "Who she is, where she's from, her family. Don't spare time or money. I need to know who she is and why." He trailed off, but Jack already understood. The detective accepted the job, promising to return with answers as soon as possible. For the next few days, Harold waited anxiously, unable to focus. He tried to concentrate on work, but every time he saw Laura in the hotel, his heart raced. He noticed how she occasionally glanced at him, as if studying his reactions. These moments chipped away at his confidence, and at night, he lay awake, remembering Anna and their past. A week later, Jack called and arranged another meeting at the same restaurant. Harold arrived early, nervously swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. When Jack entered the room, Harold knew immediately from the look on his face that bad news awaited him. The detective sat down across from him and placed a folder of documents on the table. "You were right, Harold," Jack began, opening the folder. Laura is exactly who you think she is. She's Anna's daughter. Harold felt a cold wave wash over him. He took the documents and began to read. Inside were birth certificates, photographs, and detailed information about Laura's life. The facts were undeniable. Anna had indeed given birth to a daughter after Harold left her. She had raised Laura alone without any help. It turned out that Anna had even tried to reach out to Harold in the years after he left, but he never responded to her letters. Anna had kept the identity of Laura's father a secret from her, perhaps believing it was best for her daughter. But as she neared the end of her life, knowing her time was short, Anna told Laura the truth. Laura was shocked to learn that her father was none other than Harold Smith, the wealthy and powerful man whose hotels were famous across the country. Her mother had died in poverty, never receiving help from Harold, and Laura vowed to find out who he truly was. That's why she had taken the job at his hotel. Not to ask for money or seek revenge, but to meet him in person and see who he really was. Harold finished reading the documents and slowly set them down. His hands trembled and cold sweat covered his forehead. The secret he had so carefully hidden for 20 years was now exposed. And worst of all, Laura knew the truth. That same evening, Harold decided to confront her. He couldn't live with the tension any longer. As her shift ended, Harold asked her to come to his office at the hotel, a place filled with luxury and order. Laura entered the room with a calm expression, but her eyes gleamed with cold understanding. Harold stood by the window, looking out at the night city, before slowly turning to face her. "Laura," he began softly, trying to find the right words, "I know you've figured it all out, but you have to understand what happened 20 years ago. I was a different man." He hoped to justify himself, to find words that could soften the blow, but Laura didn't let him finish. "I know who you are." Her voice was quiet but firm. "And I'm not going to keep it a secret." Harold felt his heart tighten. He saw in her eyes not anger, not hatred, but something even more powerful. Firm resolve and a calmness that suggested she had long made up her mind. In that moment, Harold realized that his life would never be the same. After the encounter with Laura, Harold couldn't find peace. His entire life, his successful business, his marriage to Julia, his children, and his social standing, was built on lies and secrets he had kept hidden for decades. Now those lies had backed him into a corner. Laura hadn't openly threatened him or blackmailed him, but each of their short conversations, each of her glances, made it clear. She knew too much, and she had no intention of keeping quiet. Every day, the pressure mounted. Laura continued working at his hotel, and each step she took seemed calculated. Her calm demeanor, subtle hints, and cold gaze showed that she was ready to reveal the truth at any moment. Harold found himself in an impossible situation. If Laura told his wife Julia or his colleagues about her origins, it would destroy everything he had built over the years. He knew he would lose his family's trust, and his reputation would be irrevocably damaged. These thoughts consumed him day after day. During meetings with colleagues, he could no longer focus on important issues. His mind was always on the one problem. At business lunches, he found himself subconsciously scanning the crowd for Laura, dreading that she might say something to expose him in the worst possible way. His hands shook when she passed by, though he did his best to keep up appearances. But things were worse at home. His wife, Julia, a smart woman, couldn't help but notice the changes in him. She saw the distracted looks, the sleepless nights, and how he began to avoid her touch. She even started to suspect that he was having an affair, especially since Harold had been spending more time at work, trying to avoid being at home. Julia's suspicions grew, and she began asking questions. One evening, as they sat at dinner, Julia finally confronted him. "Harold, what's going on with you? You've been so tense lately. I can't ignore it anymore. Is there someone else?" Harold's heart sank. He knew he needed to say something, but the words caught in his throat. He glanced quickly at the children sitting at the table and said, "Of course not. It's just a lot of work. We're launching a new project soon." But Julia didn't believe him. Her eyes told him that she was expecting a different answer, and her silence cut Harold deeply. He knew it was only a matter of time before she started investigating on her own. Harold realized he had to act decisively. He could no longer wait for Laura to make the first move. He arranged to meet her privately and try to negotiate. Maybe money would convince her to leave and forget the whole thing. He set the meeting at a discreet restaurant, where no one would see them together. Harold arrived early, going over his words in his mind, but when Laura appeared, he knew right away she wouldn't be easy to appease. Laura entered the restaurant with a cold expression. She didn't try to be friendly or polite. Harold knew this wouldn't be a simple conversation, but he still hoped that money could solve the problem. "Laura," he began, trying to sound confident, "I understand that all of this came as a shock to you. I can't change the past, but I want to make things right. I'm willing to compensate for everything you've lost." He paused, looking her in the eye. "Money could help you start a new life, leave this city, and put all this behind you." He slowly pulled out a checkbook from his jacket pocket and laid it on the table. Laura glanced at it briefly, but her face remained unmoved. "Money?" Her voice was steady, almost emotionless. "You think money can fix what you did? Do you really believe everything can be bought?" Harold felt his confidence slipping away. He tried to continue. "I just want to help. You deserve a better life than this." But Laura interrupted him sharply. "My mother didn't need money. She needed your support when she was dying in poverty. She didn't expect millions, Harold. She expected you." Those words cut into Harold's consciousness, and he felt an overwhelming sense of shame that wouldn't go away. He realized that Laura hadn't come here for money. Her goal was much deeper. She wanted justice for her mother, the woman Harold had abandoned for his own gain. "I'm not going anywhere," Laura said, standing up from her chair. "I don't want your money, but be sure of this, the truth will come out." She turned and left, leaving Harold sitting there, utterly bewildered. The final scene plays out at the company's annual corporate event, hosted by Harold Smith for his business partners, employees, and close family. It was the biggest event of the year for the company, and being invited was considered a mark of prestige. This time, everything was supposed to be perfect, and Harold had meticulously prepared for the day. However, behind his calm exterior, a storm was brewing. He knew Laura was nearby, and her plans for the evening could completely upend his life. The room was filled with influential people, socialites, businessmen, and his family, his wife Julia, and their children. The atmosphere was celebratory. Toasts were being raised to the company's success, compliments showered on Harold, and there was music and laughter. But for Harold, it was a day he dreaded. He didn't know when Laura would strike, but he was certain it would be tonight. Then the moment came when Harold had to step onto the stage to deliver his speech. All eyes were on him. Cameras flashed as they captured his confident face, but inside, Harold was racked with fear. He stood at the microphone, took a glass of champagne, and began his speech. He spoke about how much the business meant to him, how important family and the support of colleagues were, but each word was a struggle. And then, in the middle of his speech, Laura stepped forward. Her appearance caught everyone off guard, but Harold immediately knew this was the beginning of the end. She slowly walked up to the stage, took the microphone in hand, and without taking her eyes off Harold, said, "Before you finish, Harold, I'd like to add something. After all, there's something we share that no one in this room knows about." Harold froze, his heart pounding so loudly it seemed everyone in the room could hear it. Her voice was cold, but there was strength in it. All eyes shifted to Laura, and the room fell into a stunned silence. Julia, sitting in the front row, frowned, sensing something was terribly wrong. "Let me introduce myself," Laura continued. "My name is Laura, and I am Harold Smith's daughter." The moment was like an explosion. Gasps filled the room, and people began murmuring. Cameras immediately turned toward the stage. Harold couldn't move. He was in shock. Laura didn't give him time for explanations or excuses. She pressed on. "Yes, my father is Harold Smith. My mother was Anna, the woman he left more than 20 years ago. She died in poverty, and Harold never helped her, never acknowledged me. He's kept this secret from his wife, his children, and his colleagues. All this time, he's been living with this lie. Harold felt his world collapsing around him. Laura hadn't just exposed his secret, she had done so at the worst possible moment. Julia, sitting in the front row, looked pale, her eyes wide with shock, and their children standing beside her were visibly stunned. Business partners began whispering, and some were already pulling out their phones to record or make calls. Rumors began spreading like wildfire. Laura paused for a moment, looked directly at Harold, and quietly added, "The truth always comes out, no matter how powerful a person is in trying to hide it." With those final words, she walked off the stage, leaving Harold standing alone in front of a room full of stunned guests. His life, once seemingly impenetrable, had been destroyed in mere minutes. Julia quickly stood up from her seat and, without saying a word, walked out of the room. Harold saw in her eyes not only pain and betrayal, but complete disdain. She didn't need an explanation. Everything was clear to her now. His children, who had always admired their father, couldn't even look at him. They silently followed their mother out of the room, leaving Harold alone. He tried to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. But that was only the first blow. In the days that followed, his business partners began pulling out of deals, not wanting to be associated with a man whose reputation had been destroyed. His connections and influence melted away before his eyes, and the wealth he had been so proud of could no longer buy him respect. The scandal spread in the media, and now the whole world knew his secret. Everyone knew about his lies. Julia filed for divorce, leaving Harold utterly alone. His children stopped speaking to him, unwilling to be associated with a man who had destroyed their family. The company he had dedicated his life to began to crumble, and his partners turned their backs on him as if he were a pariah. Laura, having fulfilled her mission, left the city. She hadn't been interested in money or power. She had only wanted justice for her mother. And while her revelation had shattered Harold's life, for her it was the restoration of a long-lost truth. Harold was left alone. His life, built on deception and betrayal, had crumbled. He sat in his empty office, surrounded only by the silence and bitterness of his mistakes. Everything he had, his wealth, status, influence, was worthless in the face of the truth. He realized that in trying to bury his past, he had destroyed his future. Harold's story is a tale of a man who believed that money and power could hide any truth. But when the past finally caught up with him, he learned that no amount of wealth could protect him from the consequences of his actions.